Thank you, Senator Lambie. Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I too rise to oppose these bills that are before us, and I want to really understand why the Abbott government has declared war on the Australian community, young people through its harsh unemployment measures, hiking up university debt, imposing a new GP tax on the whole community, and its wholesale attack on pensioners. Why is it doing that? Because there isn't a budget emergency, as they first cried, and credible economists tell us we have a revenue problem. And this week we have a report out by United Voice and the Tax Justice Network which states that nearly 1/3 of companies have an average effective tax rate of 10% or less, and that 57% of the ASX-listed 200 companies disclose subsidiaries in secrecy jurisdictions, in other words, tax havens. 60% report debt-to-equity levels above 75%, which may artificially reduce taxable profits. And what is the Abbott government doing on tax, on increasing our revenue base, as credible economists urge them to do? It's made a vague promise of a white paper in 18 months. That is the totality of its commitment to looking at Australia's revenue base. So it seems to me and to Labor that the Abbott government is more interested in reducing the quality of life of Australians through its harsh budget measures than tackling tax and ensuring that those who should pay do so, and that those who can afford to pay do so. These two bills we're debating today showcase the harsh, cruel nature of the Abbott government's budget. And I want to focus on the impact on young job seekers. And I do that because they are the future leaders, the future workers in the Australian community. And these bills before us contain a number of measures which will have a very serious impact on young job seekers. But before I do that, I also want to stress it's not about taking from one group of Australians and giving to another. It is not about disadvantaging one group of Australians to advantage another. It's about creating a fair society which offers hope and opportunity for all Australians, no matter what their postcode and no matter what their circumstance. Foreign aid is an important measure, and we've seen cuts to our foreign aid budget. And foreign aid is important now, more so, particularly given the emergence of new extremist groups. And providing for all in our community, whether it's nursing homes in Western Sydney or roads in Victoria, that is why, as a community, we pay our taxes, and we want to see a responsible government putting together a fair and just budget, not a budget which punishes so many ordinary, everyday Australians and yet does nothing to look at the sorts of loopholes that United Voice and the Tax Justice Network have highlighted this week. And it seems to me that everyone except the government agrees that changes to unemployment benefits are some of the harshest welfare measures introduced in our country's history. In the history of this country, these are indeed the harshest cuts. And as I've listened to the debate in the Senate, it is obvious by the comments made by government senators that they do believe that our young people, young unemployed people, need to be punished, to be forced to take a job, any job, and that will only happen in the government's terms if they're hung out to dry by starving them into submission. And the comments made by the government member who said, oh well, They won't be able to eat their cheesels and play on their Xboxes. Just illustrates the insult and ignorance that the government shows towards young, unemployed Australians. Seriously, how can someone who purports to be a respectable member of our community and a responsible member of the parliament believe such a thing and let alone say such a thing? These comments and others just show the complete disrespect that this government has for our future leaders and our future workforce. Of the harsh measures the Abbott government is trying to impose on young job seekers, the most serious include a new requirement that job seekers wait 6 months before receiving any income support. How is that going to work? How will young people punished in this way get to their required number of interviews? What will they live on? How will they buy food? How will they pay the rent or indeed their mortgage? How will they pay their electricity bills? How will they put petrol in their cars? How will they get on and use public transport? Just how will they get by? And we haven't seen anything from the Abbott government about that question, because they are into punishing our young people. And then, to make matters worse, the definition of youth will be extended to 30. 30 years old is hardly what most Australians imagine to be youth. It is certainly not the view of average Australians. And for those people receiving New Start, a benefit which gives young people less money to live on, that age range has been extended from cutting out at 22 years to 24. Now, apparently, the Abbott government's rationale for that is to line up benefits and fix differing age ranges. But Labor believes it is just to further punish young job seekers and for government to make savings off the back of young unemployed people. And certainly Labor senators on the Senate inquiry into this bill were equally concerned when they said, and I quote, "The Labor senators on this committee are extremely concerned about the government's attempt to withdraw the safety net for young job seekers. Never before in this country has such a measure been proposed." End quote. These measures have received widespread condemnation, and indeed alarm from welfare agencies and other community stakeholders. The National Welfare Rights Network stated, and I quote, "This measure is a fundamental attack on the basic right to social security and the principles of adequate income support based on need." End quote. ACOS, the premier umbrella organisation for social security organisations in this country, agreed that this measure ran counter to Australia's proud history of providing a safety net to anyone in need. And that's certainly what's under attack here, is the Abbott government no longer believes in a safety net. And even in the past, Liberal governments have signed up to the need for Australia to have a safety net. And it's one of the distinctive differences between Australia and the US, is that we have this safety net, that we have a fair go, that we don't allow Australians, through whatever circumstances they find themselves in, to fall through the cracks. But the Abbott government intends to rip that safety net away and use its ideology, its view that somehow everyone should be able to take care of themselves to its most advantage. And we see it played out in these bills before us today. So ACOS said, and I quote, the removal of any income support for young people not in paid work fundamentally changes the Australian income support safety net. Traditionally, Australia has had a safety net for all who need it and requires participation in return. The budget turns this around by excluding an entire group of people from basic assistance. In this way, the measure would effect a radical structural change to the social security system." End quote. And coming off the back of a government who promised no changes and no cuts. Well, we've all been duped. We've all been duped. And to remove the safety net for some of the most vulnerable in our community is not fair, and Australian voters know that. St Vincent de Paul, as an organisation that all of us, I would suspect, think does an amazing job in our community, and all of us would respect, and probably many of us contribute to, whether it's clothes or whether it's money. We all see that Vinnies everywhere in Australia, when people are in need, Vinnies and the Salvos and a number of other agencies are there to help. Well, what did they say about this harsh, cruel budget measure by the government? They said, and I quote, "We find very concerning the idea that the government would intentionally remove any semblance of a social safety net for a particular group of people," and in this view they're talking about job seekers aged up to 30 for a period of 6 months. And I'm continuing the quote, "Unlike other cases in which someone may not be entitled to social security because they earn too much, or they're not a citizen, or they are deemed to have failed to comply with Centrelink requirements. This is a wholesale denial of any right to government support to a group of people for reasons completely outside their control and who are highly vulnerable, being both young and unemployed." End quote. And I think when organisations like St Vincent de Paul question the government's motives and urge the government not to go ahead and implement its harsh, cruel measures, I would think the government would be wise to listen to groups like St Vincent's, who work with the most vulnerable in our community. And Dr Ian Hamilton, who also gave evidence to the Senate inquiry into these bills, he's from Uniting Care, said, and I quote, "This raises a very real risk of breaching these individuals' rights." And he went on to say, "We do not believe," that's Uniting Care, "that there should be any payment at any point that has rules attached to it that will penalise someone who is diligently seeking work, because at the end of the day, these are the people who are trained, who are qualified, who are being diligent in the labour market, but who will not be successful at a given time in attaining a job, and they should not be penalised for that." End quote. The Brotherhood of St Lawrence echoes these concerns and highlighted the view that for those who do not have family support, this measure risks pushing not just the individual, but also their family into more challenging financial circumstances. And I don't know what the thinking was behind this bill or these bills, and it would seem apparent to me and certainly the Australian community that there was no thinking about this, because does the Abbott government really think that every single job seeker it penalises and punishes by disallowing a benefit for 6 months has a family support network behind them? Of course they don't. Of course they don't. And certainly to extend the age range up to 30 penalises these young people even more. And even for young job seekers who do have family support behind them, what are the circumstances of those families? Are they able to adequately feed another mouth in the household, provide financial support for that young person to continue to make their obligations and to meet their obligations. I mean, what are the impacts? Certainly the Abbott government has not demonstrated to Australian voters, or to indeed to the opposition in this place, that it's done any research work around the real impact of taking a benefit away from young people who find themselves unemployed for up to 6 months and more. We know that 6 months, through the questions we've been able to put to the government in the Senate inquiry and other places, that there are more punitive measures. So 6 months is just the start. It is just the minimum, and some people will see themselves cycling in and out of 6 months without any benefit, an opportunity to pick benefits up again, but to be slung back on the scrap heap of unemployment, no money once again by the Abbott government. That's the truth of these bills. So we've had the major non-government organisations in this country, all of them condemn this move and other moves by the Abbott government. And the Abbott government seemingly continues not to listen. And the government ignores these agencies who work with job seekers every day. These agencies have the expertise. They have the first-hand experience. Yet the government simply ignores them and favours instead its savings measures at the expense of some of the most vulnerable groups in our community. And it's not as if these agencies are sitting on their hands and not providing solutions. ACOS has provided substantial solutions to look at how welfare measures can be brought down and how the costs can be brought down, but the government is not interested in it. ACOS puts budget submissions into governments of all political persuasions, and they are the experts and they have a lot to contribute, and yet the government doesn't seem to want to listen or want to talk to groups such as ACOS, Vinnie's, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Uniting Care and so on. This punitive measure to cut job seekers off benefits for at least 6 months will result in a new generation of young people trapped in a vicious cycle of unemployment and poverty. These bills are motivated by a government who is out of touch with Australians, a government blindly determined to claw back savings. It will not, as the government suggests, ensure a more sustainable welfare system. They mightn't spend as much money, but a sustainable welfare system involves a lot more than simply saving a few dollars off the back of Australians' young people. It is an attack on our welfare system, it's an attack on our way of life, and it's an attack on a fair go for all. There is no other way to describe these harsh measures. We will no longer be the fair country. We'll be the country that discards and punishes its youth, those who, through no fault of their own, find themselves unemployed or unable to find suitable work. And what's the government's response to condemning young people into poverty? Well, it's set aside $230 million to provide grants to community organisations to provide emergency relief. Never before have we seen such a harsh measure where the government knows it's harsh, it has to up the emergency relief budget to provide for that 6 months when young people have absolutely nothing to fall back on. What kind of punitive measure is that? And what evidence does the Abbott government have or is relying on to say that 30-year-olds and those under 30 deserve such a punitive measure? And we've had unemployment benefits since 1944. Labor won't be supporting the harsh measures in these bills, and it is time the Australian government, the Abbott government, started to listen to the community and to act in a much more responsible way and not to punish the lifters of the future. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.
Thank you, Senator Lyon.